Welcome to Dive In, where I take a look into rules, lore, and history of different tabletop games and more. This video and all my content is made possible by my Patreon supporters, and it's dedicated to everyone who subscribes to my channel. You're all the reasons why this keeps going. Thank you. Join the Legion today at patreon.com/63rdlegion for free. Joining my paid tiers allows you early access to my content, a shout out in my videos, homebrew D&D items for your games, and a chance to play some D&D in the Patreon community. We now have a Discord. It's just getting started, but we have some future plans coming, like events for the members as well as Patreon events. Today we're returning to the lore of one of my favorite games, Warhammer 40k. I put into the polls what this video should be about, and after several different ones, each narrowing down the topic, we came to today's video. Just so you know, this is not a deep dive. There are so many parts I will mention in this that deserve their own video. So if I've made you interested by the end, maybe you can dive down the rabbit hole a little further on your own, or maybe I can do some more videos in the future. I love talking about Warhammer, so yeah. In the realm of 40k, both the tabletop and the lore of the setting, Space Marines are iconic. To many of us, it was the image of a Space Marine that drew us into the hobby. I can be honest and say that's how I got into this game. I fondly remember walking past my local game store the first time and seeing the image of the 2nd edition starter set with its Space Marine of the Blood Angels chapter featured prominently. That was close to 30 years ago, and I still love the universe. But regardless of what edition it is, Space Marines are the very mascot of the brand. So it's only fitting that we talk about this faction, and the best place to start is the very beginning, with the origins of the Space Marines. The Earth as we know it is gone. It's been replaced with this ugly world without oceans and little in the way of plant and animal life. The dark age of technology had ruined the world, and powerful warp storms have caused the Earth, now simply known as Terra, which is actually the Earth's true name, to be cut off from its many sibling worlds across the Milky Way. It's on Terra that a being of enormous psychic power decided he must save and unite humanity no matter the cost. Using his knowledge of genetics, he crafted super soldiers to wage war for him across the world. These soldiers were known as the Thunder Warriors. They were beyond human strength, but their ascension to their new forms had caused them to develop cruel personalities and hunger for more power. The man who would be soon called the Emperor of Mankind figured this was going to happen and built in genetic defects that caused them to age much faster. The Thunder Warriors were only designed to help him conquer Terra. For the rest of the galaxy, he was going to need something else. Within his laboratory, he began the process of crafting the ultimate warriors, ones that would be grown and not born and would be loyal to humanity. His experiments produced 20 infants, each gifted with different abilities, but before he could truly begin with this 20, extra-dimensional beings known as the Gods of Chaos stepped in. These Chaos Gods had plans for the galaxy, and more importantly, a grudge to settle with the Emperor, so they stole the chambers each infant was encased in and threw them across the galaxy. All his work was now for nothing, as it took too long to create the first 20, but then he had an epiphany. Using the genetic samples of all 20, he could implant their DNA into normal people. The gene seed, as it would now be called, would transform the people, rewriting their DNA to be what could be defined as mortal versions of the 20 infants. Oversimplification, don't worry, I'll clear that up in a second. It was with this gene seed the first Space Marines were born. To test out these new Space Marines, Big E sent them against the Thunder Warriors. Alongside the Custodos, who have to have their own whole video later on, the Space Marines slaughtered the Thunder Warriors in an event now known as the Culling. With the test complete, the Emperor gathered warriors in the tens of thousands from across Terra and transformed them into the 20 legions of the Space Marines, also known as the Adeptus Astartes. The Great Crusade had now begun, and over the next 300 years, the Emperor conquered the galaxy and reclaimed the lost 20 infants, now known as the Primarchs. As he found them, he declared them his sons and gifted them command of the legions that were created using their gene seed. This is yet another video I'll have to make later on, because each of the 18 Primarchs deserve to be talked about. By the way, yeah, 18 Primarchs. We don't really know what happened to the other two, now simply known as the Lost, save for the fact that the Emperor had found them, and he was the one who ordered them and their legions put to death, and all records of them purged. Though that this may not be the full truth and he may have just simply executed them and their loyal sons while sparing the ones who were loyal to him. As I said in my Assassinorum video, the Emperor is not a good guy. He is someone who sees what is needed and gets the job done, and really is only morally gray in every aspect of his life. As the Great Crusade was coming to a close, the Emperor decided it was time to go after the Chaos Gods himself, and left all the Space Marines and the rest of the Terran military under the control of his favored son, Horus. Thus, the first nail in the coffin of the Imperium of Man was hammered in. Unknown to the Emperor or the Primarchs, one of them had fallen to the Chaos Gods, Lorgar, Primarch of the Word Bearers. The Word Bearers served a larger purpose within the legions. First, they were the ones in charge of making sure conquered worlds fell into compliance with the imperial truth, but it also fell to them to make sure the other legions stayed the course. This meant that each legion had close to a dozen Word Bearer Space Marines within their ranks at all times. Lorgar had sent his Space Marines to introduce the concept of warrior lodges into the legions. These lodges would act as private clubs amongst the Space Marines, each of them with their own customs and traditions, and while that doesn't sound bad, many of the Primarchs banned them because they believed these would undermine the ideas of unity within their legions. And though they didn't know it, that was the point. Each warrior lodge and their word-bearer brothers began to erode the foundations of the legions they took root in, and helped guide them in the direction that Lorgar and the Chaos Gods wanted. A major turning point happened when Lorgar's most devoted Space Marine, Eberus, guided Horus into the waiting arms of the Chaos Gods. I should also quickly say it was actually Eberus that led Lorgar to the Chaos Gods, but yet again that's another video we'll have to do. Before long, 9 Primarchs stood with Horus and his new plan to kill the Emperor and replace him with Horus. It was on the world of Istvan V the first shots of the Horus heresy were fired. For the next 7 years, the Imperium was ripped in half as each faction of the Imperium divided itself and chose sides. And it all ended with the Siege of Terra, a battle that lasted for 55 days. By the end of the siege, the war was over and the Emperor was mortally wounded and Horus was killed. Now, to bring you up to further speed, by the end of the war, things have gotten really bad for the Primarchs. 3 were now dead, and 3 had been transformed into monsters by the Chaos Gods. The 9 traitor legions escaped Terra and made their way to the Eye of Terror, a section of the Milky Way that had been completely tainted by chaos. After this, 1 more died, 1 may be dead, and the final 3 traitor Primarchs had been transformed into monsters by the Chaos Gods. Back at Terra, Reboot, Primarch of the Ultramarines, quickly worked to salvage the damage his traitor brothers had caused the Imperium. He quickly gathered his remaining 6 brothers, his 7th brother had gone missing, and began to plan for the future. To keep one man from having total domination over all Space Marines and the military, he devised what would become known as the Codex Astartes. This would lay down the rules on a new system that all Space Marines would follow to help maintain their power while limiting them so they can never have another heresy. So it's time to get to the backbone of the Space Marines. Let's jump into the Codex a little bit. The Codex laid out one major change to the legions, and that was there are no more legions. The legions were divided into chapters, each 1,000 battle brothers strong. Now a battle brother is a frontline Space Marine. We have to define that right now for a little later. Each chapter is divided into 9 companies and a 10th company of new Space Marines called Scouts. More on that one in a second. The first of the companies is the First, made up of the greatest fighters the chapter has to offer. From there, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th companies are the battle companies. These companies are the ones that lead the most fighting a chapter takes part in. The 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th companies are known as the reserve companies. These companies serve 2 major functions: to support the battle companies and to lead fighting when the battle companies are already engaged. The companies themselves are further broken down and are made up of 100 battle brothers each. The first company is made up of the chapter's greatest warriors, as I've already said, and these are the Terminator, Sternguard, and Vanguard units. The battle companies all follow the same structure, utilizing standard squads. The reserve companies each fulfill a certain task to help bolster the other companies, such as the 6th and 7th having only tactical squads, 8th having only assault squads, and the 9th being all heavy weapon teams. Now the 10th company has no Battle Brothers, instead uses scouts. These are Marines just like the Battle Brothers, but are considered untested and never fight as a full company, instead being sent to the battle companies to act as scouts and infiltrators. Now I will tell you that not all chapters follow this formation. The Black Templars have no company structure, instead simply preferring to follow their own guidelines. The Space Wolves chapter has no other chapters of their gene seed, and instead companies, each acting as its own separate chapter, but all under the Space Wolf banner, so they act as one. The Iron Snakes don't have companies, but instead are squad based, around 10 Battle Brothers each, and are considered autonomous, but the rest of the chapter structure is the same. The Exorcists have several additional companies of just scouts because they lose scouts faster than any other chapter, and that's outside of battle. I could go on, but it's way too much information right now. The rest of the chapter is divided into divisions that aren't made up of Battle Brothers, but Space Marines of a separate rank. And these have no number limits, and it's just based on trained personnel. These include the Forge, the chapter Psychers known as Librarians, the Apothecary, and finally the Chaplains. Each of these divisions handle certain aspects of maintaining the chapter, such as the Chaplains maintaining the chapter's practices, being advisors to the chapter's leadership, and finally watching over the Battle Brothers. At the head of each chapter is the Chapter Master, who is not only the master of all Space Marines within the chapter, but is also the ruler of the chapter world or fleet, depending on if they have a world or not. The Chapter Master also has an honor guard made up of veteran Marines. Now, once the Codex was adopted and the 9 legions were divided into chapters, things went from bad to worse. Over the next few years, the remaining Primarchs either vanished or were put into a coma. Well, actually, Reboot went into a coma, but we may argue the point as Lionel was already in a coma, the missing brother, and Vulcan just hasn't regenerated yet. We really have to do a Primarch video. The worst part of the Codex was technically it was incomplete. Reboot knew things must change and had already begun the next stage of the Codex before he fought one of his traitor brothers and ended up in a coma. For the next 10,000 years, the Space Marines attempted to protect the Imperium that no longer had any real guidance. The Imperium became stagnant and was falling further away from Big E's original goal. And with each passing century, more Marines were needed to protect humanity. Over the next 10,000 years, 27 foundings of new chapters were ordered by the High Lords of Terra, the current ruling body of the Imperium. These foundings included the Dark Founding that only have 3 chapters remaining that have a very, sordid history. And then there's the Cursed Founding that saw genetic tampering, and oh gods, is there a lot to unpack from that founding. Most of that founding turned to chaos, and the ones that didn't are different. There are so many videos I need to do just on Space Marine lore. Finally, a ray of hope appeared. Reboot awoke, and when he did, he activated the Ultima Founding, the next step in the evolution of the Codex and the Space Marines. You see, right before he went into his coma, he teamed up with a very unique tech priest by the name of Belisarius Cawl. The goal, create the ultimate Space Marine, not just genetically, but also technologically. When Reboot went into a coma, Cawl didn't stop. For 10,000 years, he worked, creating new weapons, vehicles, armor, and genetic enhancements to improve the Space Marines. Each century, his cryo chambers gained more and more of a population of these Space Marines with his enhancements, always waiting. When Reboot returned, he ordered Cawl to unleash what he had been holding, and the new age of the Space Marine had begun. With the Ultimate Founding, chapters on the verge of extinction now found themselves back to battle-ready status, and chapters that faced gene seed degradation now got fresh, untainted gene seed. Oh yeah, there's another problem chapters were facing, and it was coming from their gene seed. You see, without pure strains of the Primarch genetics, all gene seeds came from Space Marines themselves, which effectively meant they were several generations removed from the original source. These new Space Marines, called Primaris Marines, had pure gene seed within them, meaning now any gene seed they created would be much closer to the source. Let's jump into what a Space Marine is. I know a few of you from outside the 40k community are probably saying they're super soldiers, and they are, but how do they become super soldiers? Now, earlier I said effectively each Space Marine was a mortal version of a Primarch. This is accomplished by integrating the Primarch's gene seed into the Space Marines, but that only only passes on dominant traits. For example, let's look at the Raven Guard, my favorite chapter. All Raven Guard, despite how they look before the gene seed implantation, lose all pigment in their skin and their hair turns jet black. This is almost widespread amongst the Raven Guard sibling chapters, with exceptions that are caused from other sources. Another ability that the Primarch of the Raven Guard, Corax, passed on was the ability to Shadow Walk, a psychic ability that clouds people's minds and turned him invisible. Before the start of the Horus Heresy, the Space Marines with the ability to Shadow Walk were able to form several special squads, but as of right now, it's almost gone, with only 5 Shadow Walkers now in service, 4 of which under the Raven Guard chapter, and the 5th from the Knights of the Raven. We don't know if any of the other chapters even have Shadow Walkers. Also, the Raven Guard gene seed has begun to severely degenerate, and has caused the Raven Guard to lose several abilities. We could do a whole series on the different gene seed mutations and abilities between the different Space Marine chapters, like the Black Rage of the Blood Angels, the Canis Helix of the Space Wolves, or the Rampant Bone Growth of the Black Dragons. The gene seed is only the beginning of it all. In truth, there are 15 phases of surgeries that implant around 20 new organs and genetically modify the potential Space Marine. Gets even worse when you learn adults can't become Space Marines. Yeah, they're kids at the start, though this isn't always the case. Men close to the age of 20 can be chosen as well, but only Crusader chapters who don't have a chapter world pull from these candidates, for they need the warriors faster than normal chapters. These chapters include the Chikarodons and the Black Templar. Young boys around the age of 8 to 13 are chosen to begin training, and this doesn't just mean weapons and combat. Psycho indoctrination begins almost immediately. This indoctrination can be a lot of things, including brainwashing depending on the chapter, but this is far from normal. But in the end, the candidate is now completely loyal to the chapter and the Emperor. To clarify the brainwashing, no, not all Space Marine chapters do this. Let's look at 3 Space Marine chapters as examples: the Ultramarines, the Salamanders, and the Chikarodons. Each indoctrinate their Marines differently, but all of them push loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium. This loyalty to Big E is what would be considered iconoltry, basically worshipping someone as if they were divine. That's right, most Space Marines only revere the Emperor as a divine person and don't worship him. Some do, but not all of them. Now, that's just the loyalty aspect. For the behavior indoctrination, each is very different. Ultramarines guide their Marines to be very prideful of their chapter and bestow upon them a sense of nobility. This is completely due to Roboute, the one who crafted the Marines into what they are, being their Primarch. Salamanders push their Marines to see themselves as protectors of humanity, and they do this by having their Marines maintain strong connections to their families. Ultramarines do this as well, but not on the level of Salamanders. Ultramarines return to their families very rarely, and if they do, they are seen as above their previous family. The Salamanders still show up to family dinners with their parents like nothing has happened, and they're not living weapons. Though I would like to point out that Space Marines can live for hundreds of years, so family gatherings will get pretty depressing as family ages and passes away, while little Timmy is over 200 years old and looks under 30. Now the Chikarodons, they straight out brainwash their Marines into forgetting everything they once were and transform them into berserkers who will destroy anything in their way to complete their mission. By the way, if you don't know, Chikarodon means sharp tooth, but is also the family name of the great white sharks. Yes, they are space sharks. I absolutely love these guys. But back to the brainwashing, this is due to the ages and former lives of the recruits, as they are generally taken from prison populations. There is more to psycho-indoctrination than just making them hyper-violent and forgetting their past lives, but it's a very big story to tell. Once the indoctrination and their training is complete, they begin the surgeries that will forge them into Space Marines, and from there is a chance that they won't make it. These phases include a second heart, growth hormone that will cause the Space Marine bones to harden and turn the ribcage into a solid sheet of bone, an organ that will increase muscle growth, acid spit glands, and way more. The end result transforms the candidate, now around the age of 20 if they joined as a child, up to an 8-foot tall brick house on legs, though generally they go from 7 to 8 feet tall. It's random. Once they have achieved the title Battle Brother, they are issued power armor. Basically, I'm gonna try and not embellish this too much. This armor turns them into a tank. A literal tank in some suits like Terminator armor or Grievous armor, but imagine everything that goes into a tank to make it work, ignoring the cannon, but making it look like a suit of armor. That is a single suit of power armor. Once inside their armor, they can take more damage, move faster, hit harder, and survive in any environment. The power unit for this suit requires exhaust vents, and I'm only saying this because, as I've said, it's basically a tank suit, because it's a tank suit. Okay, we're gonna have to call it here. We've learned an abridged history of the Space Marines, a quick look into the Codex, and finally the process of becoming a Space Marine. I want to go further, but that would require a lot more time and work that I can't dedicate right now in one video and feel this did the faction justice. I would love to make further videos talking about everything in more detail, especially my favorite chapters, and hopefully one day I will. I'm actually taking steps that may allow me to have more time to make this content, and if it works, there's gonna be a lot more videos. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Artificer tier. Thank you John Martin, Christopher R. Hunter, Java Squirrel, Matthew Denz, and Jonathan Haynes. You guys rock.